All right, everyone. Welcome in to Talking Soccer. On today's episode, we are going to just kind of go into what went down in Kansas City this week. And I guess outside of Kansas City, really, because this story happens in Houston for the most part. So for those of you that aren't aware, that don't follow the NWSL, that aren't dialed into what's going on with the Kansas City Current, Kansas City had high expectations to start this season, coming off of their final appearance last year, coming off of just winning free agency, signing Dabinia and all the other signings. However, they had a pretty large injury crisis, especially to start the season. With that, with the high expectations, going 0-3, it was somewhat understandable just because of how this team had been dealing with so many high-profile injuries. Dabinia, your prize signing, didn't even play a full match until this week, or at least didn't start until this week. Got into the match against Portland and their loss a few weeks ago. But it just goes to show that this slow start was kind of expected, given the magnitude of players that Kansas City lost. So I think it took everyone by surprise when Matt Potter is relieved of his head coaching duties on Wednesday, just 5 hours before the start of their Challenge Cup matchup against the Houston Dash. It really paints a picture of something larger happening outside of just poor results. So let's get into what happened on Wednesday. Then we'll talk about Camille Ashton's press conference and kind of some of the bewildering things that happened. So I wrote a piece in the Talking Soccer Substack. I'm going to be relying on that for a lot of this, just to kind of, because I've already kind of went in depth. Of course, you can subscribe to the Talking Soccer Substack if you would like. I'll have it posted down in the notes below. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see that on the screen. But if you'd like a read along, check out the show notes of the podcast. So essentially, Caroline Sjöblom, who has been the assistant coach since the start of the year, and Sjöblom has a good reputation within the soccer community. She led the Sweden U19s to the 2022 U19 Euros, getting a third place finish out of them, which was a massive overachievement for that squad. So Caroline comes with a pretty high pedigree, so to speak. However, being expected to come in and start managing a squad on 5 hours notice is going to be asking a lot for anyone. So despite the ideal start, Caroline Sjöblom oversees the club's first win of the season. First split brace in club history, which I thought was a surprising stat given all the goals they scored last year. CZ Kaiser, the KC native, getting that brace. And you watch this game, and it feels like a group of players that are finding their stride, playing with a little more freedom, a little bit more confidence, I guess would be a good word for it. If you think about some of the kind of conversations that were being had behind the scenes, I was told by a source close to the team that he found reasons to justify his positions for everything, even though it would be inconsistent with past comments. And that they would go on to tell me it made it almost impossible to meet expectations since his mind was already made up regardless of outcomes. And that's important to point out because I think if you think about what this team was expected to be, the source would be more familiar with players on the, further down the lineup, not the star players that are getting a lot of the attention, but players that are maybe in that second group or, maybe kind of in between starting and being a bench player. So on Matt Potter's perspective, if he's not expecting to have those players play a large impact and then you have 8 of your 11 starters out injured, now you have to rely on players that you weren't necessarily focused on keeping throughout the season, I think is a fair way to put it. And obviously, you watch this game, you see that the flaws behind these first 3 matches. And then the game that was the Challenge Cup match in Houston, you can see that the flaws are still there in terms of the back line, in terms of things just being overly chaotic on the pitch. And KC have a lot to deal with their back 3 or back 5 or back 4 or whatever this ends up being under Caroline Sjöblom. And not to go too much on a tangent, but Caroline said after the match that a lot of what they did was continuing the game plan that they had been practicing. So I don't think you're going to see a huge change, at least initially, from what Casey did under Matt Potter last season. But I think it does go to show that this Kansas City team, this coaching staff, is largely collaborative, or it's supposed to be largely collaborative. And that is one of the complaints that Camille Ashton had for, why they had to make this decision today. But let's go into the reasons why. So that's kind of your overview on all the background. So Kansas City current staff and Camille Ashton said that the reason that he was let go, that Matt Potter was let go, were issues around his leadership and employment responsibilities. Reinforces that, the firing wasn't necessarily for the slow start, but it does kind of lend to some of that. Camille Ashton kept saying in her press conference today that, with the expectations, a team that starts 0-3, this 0-3 start, it was a familiar refrain. So then that gets to the issues around his leadership and employment responsibilities. So issues around his leadership. I guess the first sign that this relationship wasn't perfect comes in the treatment of trialist Micaiah Minnis. Nicole Minnis, Micaiah's mother, stated that Micaiah was only given positive encouragement from Potter during training, which led to her feeling misled when the club decided to release her from her trial without giving a reason as to why. And there are a lot of other things around the Micaiah Minnis treatment, that she was given clothes that didn't fit in her trial, that she was made to pay for transportation, to pay for some of her meals, which is against NWSL bylines for trialists, and it's being investigated, and there's no word on where that is. So two sides to every story, obviously, but I think given everything that we've had come out about the situation, the lack of communication there is very important. This lack of communication is something we're going to keep coming back to and keep coming back to. So in this statement, it became clear that there was a communication issue between Ashton, Potter, and certain players on the roster, like we talked about earlier. Put it simply, communication within the club had broken down and has broken down. It fits with what Lo LaBonta and CZ Kaiser told us after the match, which I think is another point of contention. Camille Ashton said in her press conference that she wouldn't necessarily do anything differently in terms of the timing of this press conference, but in my mind, you say you do things player first, but then you send out, the coach that you just appointed hours before. You send out LaBonta and Kaiser to field the questions that you should be expecting. Maybe it is naivete to give Camille Ashton some benefit of the doubt, but you should be expecting these type of questions. You fired a coach 5 hours before a match, and if it just comes down to a difference in opinion, or if it just comes down to not getting along, I don't think that firing someone 5 hours before the start of a match, I'm going to keep hammering on that, and then not necessarily giving a reason outside of not holding up to coaching responsibilities. It's only natural, given everything that's happened in the National Women's Soccer League the past 2 years, that that's going to dredge up more questions than it answers. And I don't think that Ashton's press conference today necessarily answers some of those questions, although it does answer a few of them. So Lo LaBonta said, I've done interviews for Matt, he's done interviews for me, and we're both very truthful people. We had no knowledge that this was going to happen at all as players. We didn't have any say in it. That's where the whole shock came from. Does this change happen if everyone is healthy and the club is undefeated? I think it's fair to say no. The amount of times that Ashton mentioned today that 0-3 start, if this communication breakdown, it sounds like it wasn't great last year either. If they are 3-0, 4-0, if they are having a good run of games here, I don't think it happens. But I think that also doesn't take into circumstances as to why the start was slow to begin with. It feels like a decision made in a vacuum without taking into all the other circumstances around this. Timing of the fire is still a mystery to me, and even after this press conference, but it does reinforce that communication pathways within the club have somewhere gone haywire. Schlobum was only told about the firing and her subsequent promotion to interim manager moments before the dismissal had been made public. only a few hours before the team had to report to Shell Energy Stadium in Houston, and the players weren't made public of this information before it got out either. So the timing of not making sure that the players, like some of the players found out because they weren't with the team because of the team being in Houston when this was announced, like some of the players didn't know ahead of time. And I didn't put it in the article, but Lola Bonta was talking about how she kind of had to play damage control and, take on some of the collateral damage because some players were wholly left out of the situation and, had to find out about it via the press release. So Schulblom says it was like a roller coaster, from shock to becoming very calm. I'm used to being a head coach at the national team level for many years, and this was a similar situation. Sometimes you have 2 practices before you have a game, and I was kind of calm today. I tried to send that calmness out to the players and the staff. And Schulblom was very impressive in this press conference, I have to say. Like, you're putting a lot on her shoulders here to be able to come in and handle this barrage of questions about a guy who you've worked closely with for the past 6 months, I guess. And then also having to talk about the game and having to talk about tactical adjustments. That's putting a lot on the plate of someone who 24 hours before this did not have to speak to the media at all year long. So I thought Caroline Schulblom was very admirable for how she handled this situation. Lola Bonta came in and said, Carol came in preseason. We wanted to do a training and she led it. Your first day back and your touch isn't great. She let us hear about it, LaPonta would say in her post-match comments. And she set a standard from day one, and she did that as an assistant coach. So that's not the end of the story. That wasn't the end of the story when I wrote this article on Thursday, and that's not the end of the story as we sit here today. For now, Schulblom has the team playing with a bit of confidence. If you watched that game the other night and CC Kaiser scoring 2 goals and unlocking that attacking potential, Dabinia getting more up into the midfield and being more comfortable. And honestly, any new coach balance is going to come from Dabinia being more in the lineup and your healthy players coming back. So there will be talk at some point this year if Schulblom keeps this team playing well and this team starts winning again that she should be coach of the year, which Matt Potter was up for consideration last year. And that's not to say that anything should be made light of if Schulblom can turn this team around, but it tells you a lot about, I don't know, man, just the amount of injuries in this team. And Dabinia was brought in to be such a pivotal part, and the pivotal pieces from this team last year that you had, a lot of them are, if you think about Desi Scott, if you think about Claire Lavager, if you think about the 5 million center backs, that's being unfair to a lot of people, but you get what I'm trying to say. So for now, you have to have some confidence in Kayla Schulblom. But let's get into this press conference a bit. And as you can see, Kansas City currently sitting in last place in the NWSL, I guess tied for last with Orlando, a team that they'll be playing this weekend. So we'll have some answers there. But I don't think that Camille Ashton's press conference really answered anything outside of a few things. Of course, that being that this wasn't a harassment type of conversation, something that's going to involve an NWSL inquiry. So we know, at least, we should have to say that's good news, but it's at least good news that it doesn't seem like players were in danger or put in harm's way. But what that does do is bring more questions around the timing of this firing. If this isn't something that had to be addressed immediately with the NWSL, why does firing Matt Potter hours before the match, where he is in Houston with the team, which tells you that it wasn't necessarily planned out beforehand, right? The guy traveled with the team, was practicing with the team the day beforehand. That would lead you to believe that something happened behind the scenes that was a blowout that they can't talk about. And that's kind of where I land. And that's where kind of the vagueness of these statements kind of force you to land, really. There's no other way to take it outside of like something had to happen behind the scenes that they can't necessarily talk about, right? For Potter to be fired hours before the start of this match, for players not to be talked to beforehand, you know, I think what this comes down to, what I kind of learned from this Camille Ashton press conference, is that there is a lot of collaboration, corroboration between different departments within the Kansas City Current. I think you get that from, past assistant coaches, that Potter wasn't necessarily in on the whole collaboration aspect of it, which is fine. And that's just a difference of opinion, right? Coaches and GMs and sporting directors are going to have those differences in opinions. I think that's not groundbreaking in soccer in anywhere. But firing someone the day of a match because of a difference of opinion makes it seem like there wasn't a lot of advanced planning. And when you talk about being a player first environment, you talk about how everything you do is designed with the players in mind first, right? Firing a coach hours before a match and the chaos that ensues. And so Caroline Schulblum needs to get credit for that, because she talked about how she led a kind of group walk just to kind of talk things out. And some players wanted to talk, some players didn't want to talk. And she just told them all to go out on that field and play free. And the players went out there, and she talked about in the press conference that, she looked in the players' eyes and she could tell that there's a confidence there that hadn't necessarily been there all season. So it could turn out to be that Caroline Schulblum is the perfect manager for this team, is the perfect person to be in charge of this team. But the questions around Matt Potter being fired don't do her any justice either. This is all just going to, raise more questions at the end of the day. And Matt Potter hasn't spoken on this, obviously, and I do think that there are some legality issues behind the scenes, it sounds like. So this isn't the end of this story for sure. I mean, a lot is going to come out, and I don't necessarily feel like this press conference answered any questions. Like, I think it was good in that, okay, Camille Ashton spoke to the media. Camille Ashton had to answer some questions that a lot of us had. And I think it's good that, to get it out of the way, that this wasn't a Rory Dame situation too. This isn't a situation that's going to come up in an NWSL report, hopefully. But it didn't answer every question. I think it left me more curious than it did beforehand, because I was kind of going into this understanding some of the conversations that players have had with Potter, understanding that some of those concerns were brought to Ashton before. This doesn't seem like a group of players asking for better communication, right? And I think that's part of it. But it seems like there was a fundamental disagreement with how Potter was interacting with his other fellow coaches. And if that's the case, then you just need to come out and say it and not be so vague and not talk about, accountability and communication and collaboration, because I still think that fundamental lack of communication isn't there. And I think you can look at the Micaiah Menace situation, and it just tells you everything you need to know about what is happening right now. Because after the loss against Portland, Matt Potter was asked about it, because it just happened to be the day after Micaiah's mom came out with kind of the allegations, the accusations that, the Current didn't treat her right as she was a trialist. And what Potter said at the time was, I trust in people to do their jobs and figure out how we can be better and do right for the players going forward. Matt Potter essentially, I don't want to say throwing Camille Ashton under the bus, but he kind of threw Camille Ashton under the bus, saying, I don't know anything about this, basically. And Camille Ashton is now out here saying that she doesn't know much about that situation either, that it was on Potter's communication with the player. And in the Menace's statement at the time, that's kind of what she's told to, take it up with the coach, kind of thing. So somewhere along the way, someone knows something, isn't saying something, and they're just pointing the finger back and forth at each other. And it's just two supposed professionals, two supposed adults not taking responsibility. And that's kind of what this comes down to. It's like, when your answers are so guarded, you're just not taking responsibility, even though I know that taking responsibility probably has legal ramifications down the line of this situation. But there's a lot of answering without actually answering. And I have an issue with that. I have an issue with saying that you're a transparent organization and then not being transparent. Saying you're a player first organization, but not being player first. That's fine. I think Kansas City Current do a lot of things well, obviously. And the development for the stadium, the development of the practice facility where we were at today for this press conference is fantastic. And, the women's game deserves everything that Kansas City is doing in terms of providing resources and providing a place to play and these beautiful training environments. Becky Sauerbrunn talked about it when she was in St. Louis. I interviewed her for STL Mag, talking about just how far the game has come in the past 5 years. The Kansas City Current are definitely part of that, right? Driving that growth. They come in here, bring the team to Kansas City, have real estate projects going in, and you see Michelle King talking about how she wants to do the same for the Washington Spirit. And I think that those conversations aren't being had if the Longs and Brittany Matthews aren't out here building a stadium, building all of these facilities for these girls, for these women, these professional women's soccer players that are at the height of their profession, that are the best in the world, which isn't what you can say for the MLS side of the game. And like the NWSL has lots of issues. We talk about this all the time. I mean, this league couldn't even stream their games properly last week, but the talent, the players on the field are the best in the world, and they deserve the best. That means they deserve a streaming system that works. They deserve to have their games broadcasted. They deserve to play in brand new stadiums, or not even brand new, but soccer specific stadiums. They deserve to play in a place where fans are going to come and cheer them on and appreciate them for the athletes that they are. And they deserve to have proper communication channels with their coaches, with their general managers, and not to have things so chaotic and thrown at them at the last minute. Now, this is soccer. This is football. I understand that it's a chaotic world. I cover the men's game too. I know that this happens on both sides of the sport. This happens everywhere in the sport. But if you are on record as saying you wouldn't be the change in this game, it's a bit of a sore spot to then be 2 years into your, or 3 years into your organization and have the Hugh Williams stuff come out, the Micaiah Menace stuff come out, the whatever happened here with Matt Potter. There's a lot to answer for from the sporting side, from the, I guess, club employee side. Like, not the employees at the Current are great. I mean, from like the sporting employment side of the sporting director, of the coaches, of the staff in general. Everyone that I've interacted with outside of the, I shouldn't say that, everyone I've interacted with at the Current have been great regardless, but that's a bit of a tangent that I don't mean anything by. But I just look at it and it brings you down a little bit. You want to be excited about the NWSL. You want to be excited about what this team is doing, the team that's locally close to us. But it makes it hard when the players are constantly being hard done by everyone higher up. And that's kind of how it always has been, right? It's how it is in the WNBA too. It's like these women have to have ownership of it themselves in a way that the men's side of the game isn't necessarily asked to, because there are so many poor decision makers. Not to say that Camille Ashton is a poor decision maker, but it just kind of is how it's been. And you see Lola Bonta talking about how she had to coordinate with the rest of the team because some of the players just weren't made aware of this firing. And that shouldn't be in the job description for Lola Bonta. Like, yeah, she's one of the captains of this team, but I don't think when you sign on to be the captain of a soccer team that your job is now to inform all the other players that your coach was just fired and they just made it public, I was the captain of a college cross-country team. Obviously, nowhere near the same level of dedication, of responsibility, I guess would be the word for it. But as a captain, you are like, the bridge between the coach and the rest of the team, right? You're the leader, but you're also that bridge between, say, like the assistant coach and the team. I think like in our hierarchy, it was usually like captains, assistant coach, right? And my senior year, I had situations where I was, asked to essentially dish out training plans because of the disconnect between the coach and the rest of the team, right? And that kind of sounds similar to where this has been, that Lola Bonta has had to take up almost like a coaching level role within the staff as a liaison between the coaches and the players. And I'm sure it's part of that collaboration that Camille Ashton talked about. And I think that players should be more involved. But, relying on your player to get out the bad news, it just seems like someone who doesn't want to talk about the decisions that they're making. Anyway, I've said my piece. I've gone on about it. Let's get into some of the action from the NWSL this week. So, of course, Orlando and KC take on one another. Kansas City has seen the injury list shrink. And Mimi Larson, I think, is still questionable. But to being able to create in the matchup against Houston, what you saw in that match, too, was Lola Bonta dropping deeper into the midfield to kind of receive the ball and be that switch from the defense to the midfield to Dabinia to Michelle Cooper, let's say. Now, Michelle Cooper, if you look at Ariel Dwyer's, so let me bring that up. If you look at Ariel Dwyer's passing network chart, you'll see that Michelle Cooper was kind of on an island by herself. Basically, what a passing network is it's tracking all the passes made between certain players. And if there aren't a certain number of passes being made, then that player is going to look like they're out there on an island. So go support Ariel Dwar if you aren't already, at Ariel_Dwar. If you're watching the live stream, you can see it here on the screen. But let's get to this passing network here. So here it is from the game. You can see, if you look at Houston's passing network, you can see that they really drove play through their center backs, some switching of the ball, and they wanted to get it out to the right side of the pitch. So you can kind of see Jalissa Harris, Katie Naughton, and Caprice Diasco were a big part of their build-up, coming from Jane Campbell. And then from Katie Naughton would try to get things internally, Caprice Diasco would try to get things internally, and outside of some attackers, you can see that passing network. And KC did a good job in this game of not letting those final passes be made. You can see that Michelle Lozzi and Cameron Tucker didn't receive a lot of passes, especially in that final third. Now, there's also a Houston team that wasn't playing everyone, but this is a good Houston Dash squad that the Kansas City Currents should be able to have a lot of encouragement that they're able to look this good. Now, if you look at this pass network, there is still a lot of room for improvement. So, Cross Soto was signed this past week as a non-college, non-drafted signee because that center back battery is so depleted. So, Gabrielle Robinson was drafted this year, was not expected to start. She's now the second most experienced center back in this game, next to Addison Merrick. And you can kind of see how wide those center backs are as well. Cassie Miller getting the start in this game. And a lot of that was to try to get things internally to Lola Bonta or out wide to Kate Delfava. Now, Haley Mace is also missing from this game, so you have Izzy Rodriguez there on the left side. Isn't as good as receiving that ball along the touchline, and a lot of her role was being an outlet for Dabinia to kind of offload some of that pressure, have a little 1-2, and kind of allow Dabinia to get forward. What you would like to see is Michelle Cooper not to be out on this island that she is, and Cece Kaiser not to have to drop back nearly as far to receive the ball. So when you are looking at this pass network, you see such little action going on in the Houston half. What that tells you is that KC were playing a lot of this game, hemmed it back, and they kind of wanted that pressure so that they could spring forward to counterattack quickly. That's a lot of what you saw when this team was operating well last season. It's when they almost didn't have the ball. They absorbed that pressure and they were able to counterattack quickly ahead. It was also when their press was a little bit more active. So hopefully on Sunday, if you're a KC Current fan, if you want to see them kind of get back to where they should be, you want to see them get up in the press. You want to see those pass networks be a little bit more fleshed out. And you want to be able to see not just the out wide play thrive, which it definitely has between Haley Mace and between Kate Delfava. And it sounds like Haley Mace was just dealing with a bug and it was a kind of a maintenance type of thing. Dabinia is going to get up into that attack more. Lowe did a great job in her role getting further back. Vanessa DiBernardo was also kind of key in that midfield triangle, so to speak. So it's going to be interesting to watch that develop, but you also want to see Cece Kaiser get further up the field, and you want to see more service being given to Michelle Cooper. I talked about it. I guess I put it out on Twitter. I think Michelle Cooper is going to be so good in this league. She just pops up with the ball in opportune moments, in dangerous spaces, but that final product just hasn't been there yet. I'm very interested to see what happens in this game because it's very much a statement game as much as it is the 11th place team against the 12th place team. If you're Orlando, you look at it as that's a team that was thought to be rebuilding before the start of the season. And I don't think they've looked... I mean, they've scored 1 goal and they've allowed 8, right? So it's not to say they look good, but you kind of like some of the building blocks that they put together. And that team, and obviously Marta, you want her to play well this year as well. So you have the Dabina-Marta matchup this weekend with KC and Orlando. And if you're KC, you want to see them get the win. You want to see them at least bounce up into that North Carolina, Racing Louisville, Chicago Red Stars era. This team very much should still be fighting for the top of the league, but without the Spirit have looked, without Portland have looked, but you're throwing time away. And I think that was some of the urgency of Camille Ashton's decision to fire Matt Potter ahead of the game last week. But as much as we can make about that timing, like you can see why that urgency was being felt by Camille Ashton. So other games on the docket, you had North Carolina against Gotham. This one is interesting to me too, because I think North Carolina have looked better than a lot of us expected them to look, especially with, how well Carolyn has been just balling out this year. I kind of mentioned Kiki Pickett in my season preview. I think Kiki Pickett is having a great season. At least she's had a great first couple of games. I think this could definitely be a breakout for her. Obviously, their one win coming against KC. They've lost their next 2, and Gotham have looked very good. Lynn Williams is back to her past self, which as a KC reporter, you maybe think, maybe we shouldn't have made that trade, but Michelle Cooper will make it worth it. Lynn Williams has been back to her form now, and that's what you want to see as a Lynn Williams fan, as a U.S. Women's National Team fan. So I think Gotham probably end up winning that game with the form they've been in, but Carolina are no pushovers. I think they've shown that games against them aren't going to be easy as you maybe would have expected. Looking at that team, not to say that any game against any team in the NWSL is easy. This league thrives on chaos. You guys need to understand that. Okay. Racing Louisville against Portland Thorns. As much as I think Louisville has also looked good, 3 straight draws, I think Portland are just too much of a buzzsaw, and they're going to run right over them as we get back into things here today. Red Stars take on OL Reign. I think that's one where OL Reign win comfortably. You have the Dash versus the Spirit. This is probably my game of the week, the Dash and the Spirit here. Between this and the Wave against Angel City, there's some prime matchups. But if you're looking for one that is maybe a little bit less marquee, obviously everyone's going to be watching San Diego versus Angel City. And I think San Diego, Julie Ertz is debuting. And I think Julie Ertz could push the tide in that one, so to speak. Not to make too many water puns here today, but so that is a reason to pay attention to that one. But Houston Dash and Washington Spirit, I think, are 2 teams that are maybe under the radar with how good they've been. Obviously, the Spirit have such a strong contingent on the U.S. Women's National Team that you look at their underachievement of the past couple of years, you see what Mark Parsons is doing with that squad. And I think that they are, back to when they were in NWSL title contention, especially Trinity Rodman and Ashley Sanchez continue to play with that kind of inherent chemistry that they have. It's so fun to watch. So in that one, I think with the Dash losing to KC, I think that's going to stick with them pretty hard. And as good as Washington has been, I could see that either being a draw or a Houston win, or maybe a draw because they're both pretty evenly matched. And then as far as San Diego and Angel City go, it's like impossible to really predict. Now, Julie Ertz looked great. Obviously, there's some rust there, and some of her touches were a little bit sloppy in her appearances with the U.S. Women's National Team. But if she brings that level of effort and energy and just like being able to be a difference maker, that's one that I could see where she kind of pushes the knob for Angel City. I think that this is going to be such a good pickup for them. maybe not during the World Cup, but afterwards when all the national team players are back. It's such an interesting season for that, but I think this Julia Ertz pickup only made sense for Angel City, and it just makes so much sense for Angel City. It's one of those things where, like, I could not see this fitting in any other team. I don't think San Diego were ready to make that decision for 1 year, potentially Julia Ertz, and I think Angel City are in the place where she instantly makes that midfield better, even if it is just for 1 year. And in Angel City are never going to have trouble attracting free agents, right? So I just love that pickup so much for them. I think the league is better for having Julia Ertz back in it also, and that system is going to help her be more comfortable in the national team, which is something that the U.S. need heading into the World Cup in a couple months. So that is my bit for this week. I am trying to get into a groove with these episodes, along with Soccer Talk Lads stuff and my coverage for St. Louis City and my national team coverage. So this is my commitment to you all, trying to make this more of a weekly thing, potentially throwing the live streams up on Talking Soccer. Friday nights kind of work for me, but I know that's not the most convenient for everyone. So it's a loose commitment to at least 1 to 2 of these a week. And when I get into more of a rhythm, I'll make more of a determined statement. But in the meantime, thank you so much for listening. Of course, follow the Talking Soccer Substack. I'll post that in the show notes below and the description of the YouTube video. Follow me on YouTube, also at Talking Soccer, if you want to see the video side of things. You'll see video versions of the Soccer Talk Lives podcast. You'll see video versions of these podcasts and other videos that I have here and there, as well as my YouTube shorts. I've been kind of recording from the ground on these Kansas City Current games. You can follow me on Twitter, at HornerCoJustin on that hell site, as well, and Talking Soccer everywhere that you have social media. So in the meantime, thank you so much for listening. I always appreciate you all stopping by. I know I was a bit rambly today, but I wanted to get this podcast out while that press conference was still fresh in my mind. Looking forward to this round of NWSL matches this weekend, maybe dive into things a little more tactically, see some of the fun things that we might be seeing around the league, especially with Julia Ertz coming in. I'm be very interested to see what Angel City looks like formation-wise this weekend. But hope you all have a great weekend, and we will talk very